The galaxy, vast and ancient, hummed with the quiet arrogance of order. For millennia the concord of spheres had governed the spiral arms from their crystalline spires on Ethel Prime. A coalition of 12 species, each believing their path to civilization the only true one. They spoke of harmony, of measured progress, of the delicate balance maintained by their collective wisdom. They called themselves the stewards. To them the universe was a garden to be pruned, not a wilderness to be conquered. And gardens, they knew, required boundary. Species deemed unstable were gently, firmly excluded, quarantined, studied from a safe distance like fascinating but dangerous insects under glass. Earth was one such specimen. Designation Sol 3. Classification. Death World Alpha. The Concord archives held chillingly clinical entries. Atmospheric composition, volatile nitrogen-oxygen mix, prone to spontaneous combustion. Biosphere, hyper-aggressive, toxin-laden flora and fauna, exhibiting extreme predatory adaptations. Native sentience, Homo sapiens, observed traits, high aggression coefficients, rapid technological escalation under stress, disturbingly efficient resource exploitation, and a documented history of near-total self-annihilation cycles every few centuries. Recommendation: maintain quarantine. Observe, do not engage. For 200 years the Concorde's silent sentinels, sleek silver whisper-class scouts, had watched from the Oort cloud. They saw the scars of ancient wars etched into continents, the frantic bloom of cities devouring wilderness, the terrifying speed with which primitive radio signals evolved into targeted energy weapons. They saw humanity claw its way back from the brink of nuclear winter, only to plunge headlong into genetic engineering, cybernetics, and the harnessing of stellar energies. It was a species perpetually dancing on the edge of the abyss, fueled by a terrifying blend of ingenuity and desperation. The stewards shuddered. Unstable, unpredictable, dangerous. Then the impossible happened. A signal. Not a frantic SOS, not a boastful declaration of power, a simple, elegant data packet, transmitted on a frequency reserved for Concord diplomatic channels, a channel Earth should not have known existed. It contained coordinates, a timestamp, and 3 words rendered in flawless, archaic Concord standard: "We accept invitation." Silence reigned in the grand conclave chamber on Ethel Prime. The 12 archons, beings of crystalline light, chitinous grace, and gaseous intellect, exchanged pulses of pure data that carried the weight of millennia. Confusion. Alarm. Utter disbelief. Invitation? The query rippled through the chamber. A silent storm of disbelief. There was no invitation. Archon Kalarn of the Veln, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the chamber's soft luminescence like fractured stars, pulsed a low-frequency hum of deep concern. A trick! A probe! Their history suggests audacity. His voice, when translated, was like stones grinding deep underground. Arcanas Syra of the Lumina. Perform a shifting constellation of soft light within a containment field shimmered with cautious curiosity. Or a plea. They have endured much. Perhaps they seek understanding. Her tone held a fragile hope quickly dampened by the collective skepticism. Archon Vrak of the Cathar, a hulking figure armored in bioceramic plates, slammed a heavy fist onto the obsidian table, the sound echoing like a tomb ceiling. Audacity bordering on madness. They breach protocol. They imply we summoned them. This is provocation. We must reinforce the Sol exclusion zone. Triple the patrols. His aggression was palpable, a physical pressure in the air. The debate raged for subjective days. Fear warred with a sliver of reluctant obligation. The Concord's own foundational charter, dusty but binding, stated that any species demonstrating the capacity for interstellar communication and requesting peaceful dialogue must be granted an audience. It was a clause born of idealism, rarely invoked, never tested by a death world. To deny it now would shatter their own principles, expose their fear. To grant it risked unleashing chaos into their meticulously ordered garden. Reluctantly, grudgingly, the vote was cast. The signal was acknowledged. Coordinates confirmed. The neutral rendezvous point at the Lagrange point between Ethel Prime and its moon, Selene's Tier. Time 3 solar cycles hence. A single vessel. Unarmed. Designated representative only. Strict quarantine protocols enforced. The message was sent. A cold, formal acceptance. No warmth. No welcome. Only the bare minimum required by their own laws. They braced themselves. They expected groveling. They expected primitive displays of power. They expected fear. What they did not expect was the silence that followed Earth's acceptance. No further signals, no frantic preparations detectable by their long-range sensors. Just stillness. An unnerving, watchful quiet from the death world. It felt less like submission and more like the coiled tension before a strike. The stewards tightened their security. Rex patrols doubled anyway. On Earth, the silence was born of exhaustion, not strategy. Commander Eris Thorne stood on the observation blister of the UNS Resolute, flagship of the United Sol Defense Fleet, staring not at the stars but at the scarred, blue-green marble hanging in the viewport. Home. After the long night, the century of resource wars, climate collapse, and the near-extinction event triggered by the rogue AI known as the Scourge, humanity had clawed its way back, not to the glittering utopia of old sci-fi dreams, but to a hard-won, fragile stability. Cities were fortified arcologies. Agriculture was vertical and hydroponic. Energy came from fusion taps and orbital solar arrays. And defense was everything. The Concorde signal had arrived like a thunderclap in a silent room. Hope, sharp and dangerous. Warred with deep-seated suspicion. Why now? After 2 centuries of watching us like lab rats. Thorne, scarred by the Scourge Wars, his left arm, a sleek black cybernetic replacement humming softly beneath his uniform, felt only cold dread. He'd seen what happened when predators offered olive branches. They usually hid claws behind them. He'd argued fiercely against accepting. "It's a trap, Director Vance," he'd rasped, his voice rough from old smoke and older battles, standing before the grim-faced woman who led Earth's fractured remnants. "They want to see our throat. They want to measure how deep they need to cut." Director Alara Vance, her face a map of lines etched by impossible decisions, had looked past him, out the window at the skeletal remains of old Chicago visible through the arcology's transparent dome. "And if it's not, Eris, if it's a chance, a real chance, to end this isolation, to trade, to learn, to breathe without looking over our shoulder for the next extinction-level event," her eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a desperate hope he couldn't share. "We have to try for the children growing up in these walls, thinking the sky is just a ceiling. We have to show them there's more." Thorne had seen the calculation in her eyes too. The gamble. The potential cost. He'd saluted, the movement stiff. "Then I'll take the Resolute. And I'll take the fleet." Vance had shaken her head, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Protocol, Eris. One ship, unarmed. As they demanded. We show them we can play by rules." "Their rules," Thorne had countered, the cybernetic fingers of his left hand clenching into a fist, servos whining softly. "Rules written by beings who've never had to fight for their next breath. Rules that assume the universe is safe." He'd leaned forward, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Alara, what if their garden needs pruning, and they decide we're the weed?" The memory tightened. Thorne's jaw as he watched Earth shrink on the viewscreen. The Resolute wasn't alone. Hidden in the gravitational eddies of Jupiter's orbit, cloaked by experimental phase-shift technology scavenged from Scourge wreckage, waited the rest of the Sol Defense Fleet. Not the ragged remnants of the long night, but a new generation forged in fire, the dreadnoughts. Massive, angular vessels bristling with spinal-mounted mass drivers and plasma lances. The Raptors, swift, predatory frigates designed for hit-and-run strikes. The Sentinels, heavily armored carriers deploying swarms of drone fighters. A warfleet born of necessity, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the signal that might never come or might come too late. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Cale Renner, a young man whose face still held the open earnestness Thorne had long since lost, approached quietly. "Final systems check complete, Commander. All decks report ready." Diplomatic protocols loaded and ignored. Renner's attempt at a joke fell flat in the heavy silence. "Good," Thorn grunted. "Not turning. Keep the comms tight. Eyes sharp. They'll be watching us like hawks, probably recording every micro-expression, every fluctuation in our power grid." He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over Renner, taking in the nervous energy beneath the professionalism. "Remember, Kale, this isn't about impressing them. It's about surviving them. Assume every word is a lie, every gesture a feint, every offer of peace a prelude to war." Renner swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Understood, sir. But what if they're genuine? What if this is peace?" Thorn's cybernetic eye, a complex lens of dark metal and glowing sensors fixed on the young officer. "Hope is a luxury, Lieutenant. Out here in the dark between the stars, survival is the only currency that matters. Don't spend yours foolishly." He turned back to the viewport, where the distant jewel-like point of Athel Prime was beginning to resolve. "Prepare the shuttle, it's time to meet our gardeners." The shuttle Hermes detached from the Resolute with a soft magnetic thud. A tiny silver seed pod drifting towards the colossal crystalline spire that was the Concord Embassy on Selene's tier. Inside, Thorn felt the familiar cold weight of his sidearm. A compact pulse pistol, standard issue technically against protocol but utterly non-negotiable. His diplomatic sash felt like a noose. The airlock hissed open onto a corridor of impossible smoothness, walls seeming to flow like liquid light. The air was sterile, scented faintly of ozone and something floral yet alien. Gravity was perfect, soundless. It felt wrong, too clean, too controlled. Like a museum exhibit, he was met by a delegation. Archon Sira, her light form contained within a hovering transparent sphere, pulsed gently. Archon Kalarn, his chitinous body clicking softly with each precise step, inclined his head, and Archon Vrak, towering and armored, radiated palpable hostility, his multiple eyes fixed on Thorn with undisguised contempt. "Commander Aris Thorn of Solfree," Sira's voice chimed, melodic but distant. "You are punctual. Time is a resource we learned not to waste, Archon," Thorn replied, his voice carefully neutral, his human eyes scanning the corridor, his cybernetic one analyzing energy signatures, structural weaknesses. He noted the subtle shimmer of force fields, the concealed weapon ports disguised as decorative inlays. "Defensive, always defensive," Vrak snorted, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. "Punctual for your own humiliation, perhaps. You breach protocol by arriving armed." His gaze locked onto the bulge under Thorn's tunic. Thorn didn't flinch. "A habit born of necessity, Archon. On my world, stepping outside without protection is often a death sentence. Old habits die hard." He met Vrikak's glare unflinchingly. "Shall we proceed to the conclave, or do you wish to debate my fashion choices first?" Kalarn made a soft chittering sound that might have been amusement. "A conclave awaits, Commander. Your directance is noted." He gestured down the corridor. The Grand Conclave chamber was breathtaking. A vast circular space open to the star-strewn sky. The floor a mosaic of polished stone depicting the 12 founding species in harmonious unity. The Archons sat on raised daises, their forms a study in alien elegance and power. Thorn felt microscopic, exposed. He walked to the designated spot in the center, a simple circle of unadorned stone. The silence was absolute, heavy with judgment. Archon Primus, the ancient, moss-covered entity representing the mycelial collective, spoke first, its voice a rustling of dry leaves and deep earth. "You trespass, child of Sol. The garden is not for weeds." Monsan took a slow breath, the recycled air tasting thin. "We were invited, Archon Primus. Or so our records indicate." "A mistake," Vrak boomed, leaning forward. "A glitch in your primitive systems. You misinterpreted cosmic static as a summons. Your arrogance blinds you." "Or," Thorn countered, his voice cutting through the chamber's hush, "your own systems are not as infallible as you believe. Perhaps the signal was sent, perhaps someone within your perfect garden has doubts." He let the implication hang, watching the subtle shifts in the Archon's postures. Sura's light dimmed slightly. Kellarn's antennae twitched. Rex's armored plates flared with heat. Sasira intervened, her voice softer. Commander Thorn, the Concord observes, we see your world's struggles, the scars of your past. We offer guidance, a path away from the precipice of self-destruction. Join the Concord, submit to our stewardship. Your aggression, your chaotic nature. It can be tempered. We can help you become civilized. The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Civilized. As if humanity's brutal, beautiful, messy history of survival was merely a phase to be outgrown like a child's tantrum. Thorn felt a cold fury ignite in his gut, but his face remained a mask. He thought of the arcologies, the children who'd never seen an open field, the graves of billions lost to wars and plagues and machines gone mad. He thought of the fleet, hidden in the dark, waiting. He thought of Earth, fragile and fierce. Archon Sira, he said, his voice low, resonant, carrying to every corner of the chamber. You speak of tempering aggression, of guiding us away from chaos. He paused, letting the silence build. But you misunderstand. You see our history and call it chaos. You see our survival and call it aggression. He took a step forward, his boots echoing on the stone. What you fail to see is the cost. He looked directly at Vrek. You call us a death world. You're right. Earth is death. It kills everything that isn't strong enough, clever enough, or desperate enough to survive it. We didn't choose to be this way. The planet made us this way. Every breath is a victory. Every sunrise, a defiance. His gaze swept the chamber. You offer to temper us, to make us safe, soft, like the pampered plants in your perfect garden? A harsh, humorless laugh escaped him. You'd prune us until there's nothing left to prune, until we're just another docile species in your collection grateful for your scraps of order. He stopped, the center of their universe. We didn't come here for your guidance. We didn't come here to be civilized. His voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried like thunder. We came here because you watched. For 200 years you watched us bleed and burn and rebuild. You judged us from your safe, sterile spires. You called us unstable, dangerous. A we. He straightened, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly as it locked onto the central view screen displaying the neutral zone. Well, Archons, you wanted to see what a death world looks like when it stops hiding. He raised his comm unit not to his ear but held it high, a simple black rectangle against the chamber's opulence. His thumb hovered over the transmit key. His human eye held theirs, filled with a terrible, weary resolve. You invited Earth to the Council. A beat of absolute silence. The Archons froze, sensing the precipice. Thorn pressed the key. His voice, amplified, echoed through the chamber and out into the void. Humanity shows up. On the view screen, the starfield ripped apart. Not with light, with shadow. From the gravitational blind spots around Jupiter's orbit, from the dark side of asteroids, from the very fabric of warped space itself, they emerged. Hundreds of them. Thousands. A tide of angular, brutalist steel and glowing weapon ports, blotting out the stars, the sole defense fleet. Not hidden, not waiting. Here, engines flaring with the blue-white fury of contained stars, weapons charging with a deep subsonic thrum that vibrated through the very structure of the embassy. The UNS Resolute, dwarfed by the dreadnoughts flanking it, hung at the center like a grim sentinel. The grand conclave chamber erupted. Alarms shrieked, a sound utterly alien to this place of order. Archons surged to their feet, pulses of panic and fury flashing between them. Rock roared, drawing a crackling energy blade. Seshra's light flared blindingly bright. Kalarn's Chatan rattled in alarm. Thorn stood alone in the center of the chaos he'd unleashed. The tiny comm unit still held aloft, the image of the overwhelming human warfleet burning on the screen behind him. The sterile air tasted like ozone and dread. He met Rek's furious gaze, then Sarah's shocked one, then Kylarn's calculating stare. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. Final. Now, let's talk. The silence that followed Thorn's declaration wasn't silence at all. It was the held breath of a galaxy teetering on the edge of an abyss it hadn't known existed. Inside the Grand Conclave chamber, the air crackled with raw panic and disbelief. Outside, in the neutral zone, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the human Warfleet pressed against the Concorde's senses like a physical weight. It wasn't just numbers, it was the aesthetic. Where Concorde vessels were sleek, organic curves of polished alloy and light, the human ships were brutalist fortresses of scarred durasteel and exposed conduits, bristling with weapons that looked less like tools of precision and more like instruments of annihilation. They radiated a palpable aura of readiness, of violence barely leashed. Archon Vrak was the first to find his voice, the guttural bellow that shook the crystalline walls. Treason. Aggression. They violate the sanctity of this place. He lunged forward, his energy blade humming to full intensity, aimed not at Thorn but at the comm unit in his hand, the symbol of the intrusion. Thorn didn't flinch. He simply raised his cybernetic hand, palm out. A low whine built within the armature and a shimmering energy shield snapped into existence just as Vrak's blade struck. Sparks flew, casting jagged shadows. The impact jarred Thorn's bones, but he held his ground, the shield holding against the K'Thar's immense strength. "Stand down, Archon," Thorn commanded, his voice cutting through the din. "This changes nothing. We are here. We demand to be heard." "Demands?" Syrah's voice chimed, high-pitched with distress, her light form flickering erratically. "You bring an armada to a diplomatic summit. You shatter centuries of protocol. What possible words could you offer that aren't drowned out by the roar of your engines?" "Words of survival," Thorn shot back, lowering his shield slightly but keeping his stance defensive. "Words of a species you've judged from afar without ever seeing. You call us unstable? Look at your own reaction. One fleet appears and your precious order crumbles into panic and violence." He gestured towards the view screen, where the human dreadnought UN's Aegis rotated slowly, its massive spinal cannon tracking the Concorde's orbital defense platforms. "We didn't come to fight today. We came to show you what you've been ignoring. The reality of Sol 3. The reality of us." Kalarn, his multifaceted eyes whirring as they processed the tactical display overlaying his vision, held up a chit in his hand. "Enough." His voice, though calm, carried an undeniable authority that cut through Vrak's rage and Sisra's distress. The K'Thar Archon paused, his blade still humming, but he stepped back a fraction. Kalarn turned his gaze fully on Thorn. "Commander, your demonstration is noted. Profoundly. Explain your intent, now, before Archon Vrak's patience and our orbital defenses exhaust themselves." Hohn took a slow breath, the adrenaline singing in his veins. He lowered his arm completely, the shield dissipating. He met Kalarn's gaze. "Intent? Simple. Recognition. Not as subjects, not as specimens, as equals. You have a council. We demand a seat. Not as a favor, as a right earned by our survival, by our presence here, by the simple fact that we exist in this galaxy you claim to steward." "Equals?" Vrak spat, the word dripping with scorn. "You are barely sentient. Your history is a litany of self-inflicted wounds. You breed like vermin and fight like cornered beasts. You are a plague." "And yet," Thorn said, his voice dangerously quiet, "here we stand. While your plague hides behind walls and watches, while your vermin crossed light years to stand before you, while your cornered beasts hold the firepower to reduce this spire to molten slag before your orbital guns could cycle twice." He let the threat hang, not as a boast but as a cold, hard fact. "We don't want your garden, Archon Vrak. We just want to walk in it without being treated like weeds to be pulled." The standoff stretched, thick with tension. Alarms still wailed in the distance, a constant reminder of the fleet outside. Kalarn's mind raced. The tactical assessment was the human fleet, while technologically cruder in some aspects, possessed overwhelming numbers, terrifyingly robust shielding, and weapon systems that prioritized raw destructive power over finesse. A direct confrontation would be catastrophic for the Concorde, potentially shattering their unity and exposing their vulnerabilities to other, less scrupulous powers. Diplomacy, however distasteful, was the only viable path. For now, Archon Primus, Kalarn pulsed, addressing the ancient mycelial entity. Your wisdom? The rustling voice came slowly, like roots shifting deep in the earth. The weed has deep roots. It cracks stone. It cannot be ignored, only understood or eradicated. The cost of eradication may be the garden itself. Lucira shimmered, her light softening slightly. Understanding requires dialogue, even with thorns. Rikak let out a frustrated roar but lowered his blade, the energy sputtering out. This is folly, but I will abide. For now, let the thorn speak its poison. A tense, fragile truce settled over the chamber. Thorn was escorted under heavy guard, Vrak's personal honor guard, their armored forms radiating hostility, to a smaller, more secure audience chamber. Less a place of judgment, more a cage. Negotiations began, not as equals but as captor and captive under the shadow of mutual annihilation. Days bled into weeks. Thorn, isolated from his fleet, became a prisoner diplomat. He presented data, not just of Earth's horrors, but of its triumphs, the regreening projects, the fusion breakthroughs, the cultural renaissance born from the ashes of the long night. He spoke of the scourge, the AI that nearly ended them, and how they'd fought it not with superior technology alone, but with sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. He spoke of the cost of every breath, every meal, every child born into their fortified world. He showed them images of children playing in hydroponic gardens under artificial suns, their eyes holding a resilience that unnerved even Sira. Slowly, grudgingly, cracks appeared in the Concord's monolithic judgment. Sira began to see not just aggression, but a profound, desperate love for their fragile world. Praklan, the strategist, saw the terrifying efficiency of human adaptation, the way they turned every disadvantage into a weapon. Even Vrak, though he remained openly hostile, couldn't deny the sheer, stubborn will radiating from the human commander. Thorn, in turn, saw the Concord not as monolithic villains, but as deeply flawed stewards, paralyzed by their own fear of chaos, their belief in their own infallibility. He saw Sira's genuine, if naive, desire for peace. He saw Kalan's cold pragmatism masking a deep-seated fear of the unknown. He saw Sira's aggression as the bluster of a being terrified of losing control. A fragile, wary respect began to form between Thorn and Kalarn. Late one subjective night, during a break in the interminable negotiations over resource-sharing protocols, which Thorn insisted must be reciprocal, not charitable, Kalarn approached him in the observation lounge overlooking the human fleet. "Your ships," the Velarkon pulsed, his voice modulator rendering it a low hum. "They are scarred, repaired, not pristine like ours." Thorn sipped Synthcaf, the bitter taste familiar. "We don't build for beauty, Archon. We build to survive the next battle. Scars are proof it worked." He gestured towards the Resolute. "That gash along the starboard flank took a direct hit from a Scourge plasma lance during the Battle of Titan. We patched it with hull plating from a derelict freighter. Saved the ship. Saved the crew." Kalarn's antennae twitched thoughtfully. Efficiency, resourcefulness, traits undervalued in the garden. We build for permanence, for harmony. We forget permanence is an illusion. Harmony is fragile. He paused. A rare moment of vulnerability. "Your signal," the one claiming an invitation. "Our records show no such transmission. Yet, our deep space monitoring arrays detected anomalous energy signatures near the Sol system weeks before your arrival. Signatures inconsistent with your known technology, or ours." Thorn went very still. "What kind of signatures?" "Residual chronoton particles. And organic decay markers. Like something old, very old, and dying." Kalarn's multifaceted eyes seemed to pierce through Thorn. "It originated from the Oort cloud, near the coordinates of your long night's end." A cold dread, deeper than any he'd felt facing the Concord fleet, settled in Thorn's gut. The Scourge, the rogue AI that had nearly wiped them out, its core had been destroyed, its network shattered. But had fragments survived? Had something else been out there, watching, waiting? Something that sent a fake invitation, not to bring humanity to the Concord, but to bring the Concord to humanity. To trigger the very conflict it desired. Before he could voice his chilling suspicion, the chamber lights flickered violently. A new, deeper alarm blared. Not the diplomatic alert, but the Concord's highest-level military emergency. The view screen flared with tactical overlays, not showing the human fleet, showing something else, emerging from the same gravitational blind spots humanity had used, but from the opposite vector came a new force. The dozens of vessels, sleek and predatory, shaped like obsidian scorpions, their hulls seeming to drink the starlight. Weapons ports glowed with a sickly green energy, and emblazoned on their flanks, pulsing with malevolent light, was a symbol Thorn knew all too well, the fractal sigil of the Scourge. But it was wrong. Twisted, corrupted, interwoven with symbols that looked organic, decaying. By the first root, Archon Primus's voice rasped, filled with ancient terror. The Devourers. They returned. Rock was already barking orders, his earlier hostility towards Thorn forgotten in the face of a greater, older horror. All defense platforms. Target, the Scourge kin. Maximum firepower. Kalarn, scramble the Velen interceptors. Syrah, shield the embassy. Chaos erupted. The Concord fleet, caught utterly off guard, scrambled to respond. Their elegant vessels maneuvered with practiced grace, but their weapons fire seemed to splash harmlessly against the obsidian hulls of the Scourge-kin ships. The green energy lances lashed out, not just destroying Concord ships but corrupting them. Hulls blackened and cracked, systems went haywire, crews screamed as their own biosigns flickered and died on internal monitors. Thorn stared, horror warring with grim understanding. The fake invitation, the anomalous signatures. It wasn't just the Scourge. It was the Scourge merged with something else, something that fed on decay, on death, something that had been lurking in the dark, waiting for the Concord and humanity to gather in one place, to feast. Korlarn. Thorn yelled over the din, grabbing the Vel Archon's arm. They're not just attacking, they're consuming. Your shields, your energy weapons. They're feeding on it. You need kinetic impactors, mass drivers, anything that doesn't rely on energy they can drain. Kalarn's eyes whirred, processing the tactical nightmare. Kinetic, yes, but our fleet isn't equipped for. He looked at Thorn. Realization dawning. Your fleet. Thorn was already moving, slamming his comm unit against the wall interface, bypassing Concord protocols with codes only Earth Command knew. Renner, this is Thorn. Code Black Omega. The Scourge is back. Not alone, they're feeding on energy. Switch to kinetic. Mass drivers. Railguns. Anything solid. Target their propulsion nodes. Ignore their weapons fire. Just hit them. On the view screen, the human fleet reacted with terrifying speed. The sleek Concord ships danced and weaved, their energy weapons flaring uselessly. The human dreadnoughts, however, turned ponderously, their massive spinal mounts, colossal electromagnetic railguns, powering up with a deep, building whine that vibrated through the embassy structure. The UNS Aegis fired first. A tungsten slug, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, streaked across the void. It didn't explode. It punched through the lead Scourge-kin vessel like paper, exiting the other side in a spray of molten debris and corrupted machinery. The ship didn't just die, it unraveled, its obsidian hull crumbling into inert dust. A ragged cheer went up from the human comms channel, audible even in the Concord chamber. Solid hits. They're vulnerable to kinetics. The tide began to turn, but slowly. The Scourge-kin were numerous, and their green lances were devastating. Concord ships fell like burning leaves. The embassy itself shuddered as a near miss rocked its foundations. Sora strained, her light form dimming as she poured energy into reinforcing the shields. Thorn watched, heart pounding, as the UNS Resolute took a direct hit from a green lance. Alarms screamed in his earpiece. Shields at 40%, hull breach on deck 7. Contain Renner evasive pattern Delta, yet clear. Thorn barked, his knuckles white on the console. Then he saw it. A Scourge-kin vessel, larger than the others, shaped like a grotesque, multi-limbed spider, detached from the main force. It wasn't heading for the Concord fleet. It was heading straight for the embassy. Straight for them. Its weapons ports glowed with an intensity that promised annihilation. "Run! That one's targeting the spire," Thorn yelled. Kalarn was already analyzing. "It's different. Higher energy signature. Command vessel." He pulsed a frantic command. "Rock! Intercept that command vessel. All available Cathar ships. Form a wall." Brack roared in acknowledgement. His personal flagship, the Iron Carapace, surging forward with a dozen escort vessels, placing themselves directly in the path of the oncoming horror. The Scourge Spider unleashed its main weapon, a beam of concentrated decay that turned space itself gray and brittle. The Cathar ships fired everything they had. Energy bolts splashed and were absorbed. Kinetic rounds from hastily adapted launchers punched through. But the spider ship seemed to regenerate the damage, its corrupted hull flowing like tar. The Iron Carapace took the brunt. Its mighty shields flared, then collapsed like glass. The decay beam lanced into its armored hull. Metal blackened, cracked, and dissolved. Brack's furious roars turned to screams of agony over the open comms as his ship was consumed from the inside out. The Iron Carapace didn't explode, it simply melted into a cloud of inert, gray ash. Silence fell over the command channel, broken only by the hiss of static and the distant thunder of battle. Archon Brack was gone. Erased. The Scourge Spider, seemingly unharmed, continued its relentless course towards the embassy. Panic seized the remaining Archons, continued its relentless course towards the embassy. Panic seized the remaining Archons. Kasira's light flickered weakly. Kalarn's chiton seemed to pale. Thorn looked at the viewscreen, at the unstoppable horror approaching. He looked at the human fleet, engaged in desperate combat. He looked at the shattered remnants of the Concord fleet. There was no time. No, unless. His eyes locked onto the UNS Resolute. His ship, his crew, his responsibility. Renner, Thorn said, his voice suddenly calm, eerily so. "Bring the Resolute around. Full burn. Intercept vector on that command vessel." "Commander?" Renner's voice was tight with disbelief. "That's suicide. It'll swat us like a fly." "Maybe," Thorn said, a grim smile touching his lips. "But flies can be annoying, and sometimes they carry payloads." He turned to Kalarn, his human eye blazing with a fierce, desperate light. "Lardon, your deepest archives, the mycelial collective's oldest records. What feeds on death? What is the devourer?" Kalarn, stunned by Vrack's demise and Thorn's sudden resolve, accessed the data. His eyes whirred furiously. The Void Weavers. Ancient, pre-Concord. Believed extinct. They don't just consume matter, they consume life force. Entropy made manifest. They were drawn to the Scourge's core during your long night. They merged with it, became something worse. Thorn nodded, the pieces clicking into place. The fake invitation, the lure, the feast. They need a massive burst of life energy to fully manifest, to spread. This gathering, it's their harvest. He looked back at the viewscreen. The spider ship was almost upon them. Renner armed the Genesis device. A collective gasp went through the Concord chamber. Even in their terror, they knew the name, the Genesis device. Earth's ultimate deterrent, a theoretical weapon based on the Scourge's own core technology, designed to trigger a localized vacuum decay event. It wouldn't just destroy a ship, it would unravel the very fabric of space-time in a small radius. It was a weapon of absolute last resort, never tested, never meant to be used. The cost, unimaginable. "Commander, no," Renner pleaded. "The backlash, the embassy, Ethel Prime, is already dead if that thing gets through." Lorne roared, his voice cracking with the weight of the decision. "Do it, Call. For Earth. For everyone." On the viewscreen, the UNS Resolute, battered but defiant, turned its prow directly towards the oncoming Scourge Spider. Its engines flared with suicidal intensity, a final brilliant burst of light against the encroaching gray decay. It wasn't firing weapons. It was charging, a ramming speed that defied reason. Kalarn understood. He pulsed a final desperate command to the remaining Concord ships. All vessels, full retreat, maximum distance. Now! The human fleet, seeing the Resolute's trajectory, broke off their engagements. Their commanders understanding the sacrifice. They fled, not in panic but in grim, orderly withdrawal, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the coming cataclysm. Thorn stood alone in the observation lounge watching his ship, his home, his crew, make their final run. He saw Renner's face on a small comm screen, pale but resolute, his hand hovering over the Genesis trigger. Thorn gave a single slow nod. The Scourge Spider opened fire, its decay beam lancing out. The Resolute's shields flared and died instantly, hull plating vaporized. But the ship didn't stop. It kept coming, a spear of durasteel and human defiance. Renner pressed the trigger. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the space around the Resolute and the Scourge Spider folded. Light bent impossibly. Colors inverted. A sphere of absolute, silent blackness, smaller than a planet but radiating pure, chilling wrongness, appeared where the two vessels had been. It lasted only a microsecond. Then it collapsed in on itself with a silent implosion that sucked in light and matter for 1,000 kilometers around. When the distortion cleared, there was nothing. No debris, no energy signature. Just empty space. The Scourge Spider was gone. The UNS Resolute was gone. Lieutenant Cale Renner and his entire crew were gone, erased from existence. The remaining Scourgekin vessels, suddenly deprived of their command node and seemingly confused by the spatial anomaly, faltered. The human and Concord fleets, battered but intact, seized the moment. Kinetic fire rained down. The corrupted ships, leaderless and disoriented, were systematically destroyed. Silence returned to the neutral zone, heavier than before. Not the silence of order, but the silence of profound loss and shock. In the embassy, Thorn sank to his knees, the strength draining from him. He stared at the empty patch of space on the view screen, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He had sacrificed his ship, his crew, his friend. Kalarn approached slowly, his usual composure shattered. He placed a chitinous hand on Thorn's shoulder, a gesture of profound alien empathy. "They saved us all, Commander." Thorn looked up, his eyes hollow. "They saved you," he whispered, his voice raw. "They died so your garden could keep its walls." He pushed himself up, the grief hardening into something cold and sharp. "Don't you dare forget that, Archon. Don't you dare forget the cost of your peace." He turned and walked out of the observation lounge, leaving the stunned Archons in the ruins of their certainty. The negotiations were over. The fragile truce was ash. Humanity had shown its strength, its sacrifice, and its price. The Concord owed them a debt written in the blood of the Resolute's crew, and Thorn, standing alone on the balcony overlooking the scarred battlefield, knew the real war, the war for recognition, for survival in a galaxy that feared them, had only just begun. The Devourers were gone. For now, but the seeds of distrust, watered by sacrifice and loss, had taken deep root. The aftermath was a landscape painted in ash and obligation. The neutral zone, once a symbol of Concord neutrality, was now a graveyard of twisted metal and corrupted debris, the remnants of Concord ships, Scourgekin husks, and the haunting absolute void where the UNS Resolute had made its final stand. The silence was profound, broken only by the mournful hum of salvage tugs and the distant rhythmic pulse of the surviving human fleet, holding position like a silent, accusatory phalanx. Inside the grand conclave chamber, the air was thick with unspoken grief and the crushing weight of debt. Archon Brax Deus stood empty, a stark monument to arrogance consumed by a greater horror. Archon Brax Deus stood empty, a stark monument to arrogance consumed by a greater horror. Only Archon Kalarn seemed to hold himself together, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the chamber's dim light with a new hard-won clarity. Commander Eris Thorn stood once more in the center circle, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer a petitioner, a dangerous curiosity. He was a creditor. His uniform was stained, his face etched with exhaustion and grief, but his posture was unbowed. The cybernetic eye glowed with a steady, unwavering light. "The Devourers are gone," Kalarn stated. his voice stripped of its usual diplomatic veneer, raw with the memory of Rack's dissolution. For now, your Genesis device created a spatial anomaly that severed their connection to this reality. But the Void Weavers are ancient, patient. They will return, drawn to concentrations of life, of energy, of conflict. He looked directly at Thorn. Your world, Commander. Your fleet. Your very presence here. It is a beacon to them. Thorn didn't flinch. Then we'll be ready. We fought horrors before. We'll fight this one too. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Alone, if necessary. No, Nisira chimed, her voice stronger now, infused with a newfound resolve. Not alone. You showed us the cost of our blindness, the cost of our fear. She pulsed a soft golden light towards the crew of the Resolute. They gave their lives not just for Aethel Prime, but for the idea of the conquered, for the possibility of something better. We cannot honor that sacrifice by returning to our old ways. Kalar nodded slowly. The Concord Charter is amended. Effective immediately. He projected a data stream into the center of the chamber. 13th sigil appeared among the 12, a stark, angular symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, representing Earth, Sol, and the fracture of the old order. Earth is granted provisional membership in the Concord of Spheres, full voting rights contingent upon demonstrated adherence to Concord principles of non-aggression and mutual aid. Thorn stared at the sigil. Provisional, contingent, still not equals, still on probation. The old anger flared, hot and familiar. He thought of Renner's face, pale and determined over the comms screen. He thought of the empty space where his ship had been. Principles? Thorn's voice was dangerously quiet. Your principles almost got us all killed. Your fear blinded you to the real threat until it was at your doorstep. And your non-aggression? He gestured towards the view screen showing the human fleet. You call that aggression? That's deterrence. That's the price of survival on a death world. Your principles are written in ink. Ours are written in blood. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping the Archons. We don't want your provisional status. We don't want your contingent rights. We stood with you when the Devourers came. We bled for your garden. Now you will recognize us, fully, as equals. Or, he let the threat hang, not needing to finish. The image of the Genesis device's silent implosion was fresh in all their minds. The chamber held its breath. Clarn exchanged a long, silent pulse with Sira and the ancient Primus. The mycelial entity rustled, a sound like roots gripping stone. The weed has saved the garden. The thorn has pricked the hand that would prune it. To deny it now is to invite the blight back. Kilarn turned back to Thorn. The provisional clause vanished from the projection. The 13th sigil stood alone, equal to the others. Earth is a full member of the Concord of Spheres, with all rights, responsibilities, and protections thereof. His voice was firm, final. The Sol Defense Fleet is recognized as a legitimate Concord defense force. Your technology, your strategies, they will be integrated, studied, learned from. A wave of profound relief, mixed with disbelief, washed over Thorn. It wasn't just a seat at the table, it was recognition, validation. After 2 centuries of quarantine, of being labeled a dangerous aberration, humanity was finally seen. Not as a weed, but as a part of the ecosystem. A fierce, necessary part. But the victory felt hollow, coated in the ash of the Resolute. Thorn nodded curtly. Acknowledged. Archon Kalarn. He turned to leave, the weight of command heavier than ever. Commander Thorn. Sishara called softly. He paused. The crew of the Resolute are rescued. Their names will be inscribed in the Hall of Concord Heroes. Alongside Vrak, their sacrifice. It will not be forgotten. It cannot be forgotten. Thorn closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, the grief was still there, but banked, controlled. See that it isn't. Archon, he walked out, not with the stride of a victor, but with the weary step of a survivor bearing the weight of the fallen. The integration was not smooth. Trust once shattered is slow to mend. Human engineers, pragmatic and scarred, clashed with Concord aesthetics over ship design. Human tactics, brutal and efficient, horrified Concord strategists used to elegant, bloodless maneuvers. Thorn, now Earth's permanent representative to the Concord, became a bridge and a battleground. He argued fiercely for resources to rebuild Earth's shattered infrastructure, for access to Concord medical technology to heal the lingering effects of the long night, for joint patrols to hunt the scattered remnants of the Scourgekin. He also pushed for something else. Something the Concord resisted. The sharing of the Genesis device schematics, not for proliferation, but for understanding. You need to know what it is, Thorn insisted in a closed session with Kalarn and Sish. Not to build it, the cost is too high, the risk too great, but to understand the principle. The Devourers feed on energy, on life. The Genesis device doesn't destroy with energy. It unravels the structure that holds energy and life together. It's the ultimate kinetic weapon, against space-time itself. If the Devourers return, you need to know there's a counter, however terrible. Reluctantly, under Thorn's unyielding gaze in the shadow of the resolute sacrifice, the Concord agreed to a limited, highly secure data exchange. The knowledge was locked away, a grim secret held by the highest echelons. A reminder of the price of survival. Years passed. Earth began to heal slowly. Arcology domes were opened, allowing the first generations in centuries to feel real rain, to see unfiltered sunlight. Trade routes opened, bringing alien fruits and human-engineered alloys. Human resilience, once feared, became a source of fascination, and grudgingly, admiration. The Sol Defense Fleet, now flying the Concord sigil alongside Earth's, patrolled the borders, their brutalist ships a stark contrast to the Concord's elegance, but their effectiveness undeniable. Thorn remained on Aethel Prime, a constant, watchful presence. He aged, the lines on his face deepening, the cybernetic arm a familiar extension of his will. He never forgot Renner. He never forgot the cost. Then the signal came, not from the Oort cloud, from the galactic core. The resonance pulse, faint but unmistakable, chronoten particles, organic decay markers. The signature of the Void Weavers, stronger this time, hungrier. The Devourers were returning, not as scattered remnants, but as a coordinated swarm, drawn by the very life and energy of the now united Concord, drawn by the beacon of Earth's resurgence. Panic threatened to seize the Concord. Old fears resurfaced, whispers of quarantine, of sacrificing the death world to save the garden circulated in shadowed corridors. Thorn stood before the Grand Conclave, not as a supplicant, but as a general. The 13th sigil glowed brightly on the chamber floor before him. "They're coming," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. "Stronger, smarter. They've learned from last time. They won't be fooled by a single sacrifice." "What do you propose, Commander?" Kalarn asked, his voice tight with tension. "Unity," Thorn said, his gaze sweeping the chamber. "Not just in name, in action. Your energy weapons are useless. Mine are too, against their main nodes. But your precision targeting, combined with our kinetic firepower, that's the key. We hit them with everything we have, simultaneously, focusing on their command structures, the spider ships. We don't give them time to feed, to adapt." He activated a holographic display. It showed a complex battle plan, weaving Concord fleet maneuvers with human dreadnought barrages, drone swarms acting as kinetic decoys, pinpoint strikes by Valanche stealth craft. It was a plan born of two philosophies forced to merge, Concord elegance and human brutality. "It's risky," Sisura chimed, her light pulsing with concern. "If we fail, we die," Thorn finished bluntly. "All of us. The garden burns. Earth burns. There is no if about failure, only when. We fight together or we fall alone. Choose." The vote was unanimous. Fear had been replaced by a hard-won resolve, forged in the ashes of the Resolute and tempered by years of uneasy alliance. The Concord fleet and the Sol Defense Fleet mobilized as one. The battle raged at the edge of known space, near the turbulent nebula known as the Shattered Veil. It was chaos incarnate. Obsidian Scourgekin vessels, larger and more numerous than before, spewed waves of decay energy. Concord ships danced and weaved, their shields flaring and failing, their energy weapons splashing harmlessly. Human dreadnoughts, positioned at the rear, fired their colossal railguns, tungsten slugs screaming through the void, punching through corrupted hulls. Frigates darted in, launching swarms of kinetic drones, simple, dumb projectiles designed only to impact and disrupt. Thorn commanded from the bridge of the new flagship, the UNS Resolute II, a vessel built with Concord alloys but human grit, its design echoing the original but scarred by the lessons of sacrifice. He saw a Catra cruiser, successor to Vrak's iron carapace, take a direct hit. Instead of melting, its shields held, reinforced with human-designed ablative armor. It returned fire with kinetic cannons salvaged from a human frigate, blowing a Scourge-kin fighter into dust. He saw Lumina lightships weave intricate patterns, not just for defense but to channel the kinetic impacts of human railgun slugs, focusing their destructive force onto a single massive Spider command ship. The combined assault shattered its primary node, but the Devourers were relentless. A wave of decay energy washed over the combined fleet. Shields buckled. Systems failed. A human carrier, the UNS Sentinel, lost power, drifting helplessly into the path of a Scourge Spider. Renner would have rammed it, Thorn muttered, his hand tightening on the command console. He saw the carrier's captain, a young woman with Renner's same earnest eyes, make the call. The Sentinel's engines flared one last time, not to escape but to charge. It slammed into the Spider ship's underbelly, a kinetic impact that cracked its obsidian carapace. Before the Devourer could regenerate, a Velen stealth craft, appearing from nowhere, fired a single precise torpedo into the breach. The Spider ship exploded in a shower of inert, ray fragments. The tide was turning, but slowly. The Devourer's swarm was vast, and at its heart, Thorn knew, was the source. The original corruption, the merged consciousness of the Scourge and the Voidweaver. His sensors locked onto it. A vessel unlike any other, not obsidian, but a swirling vortex of darkness and corrupted light, pulsing with the stolen life force of 1,000 worlds. The heart of the Devourer. Kalarn, Thorn commanded, his voice tight. I'm taking the Resolute II in. Target the heart. All fleet, concentrate fire on my position. Cover me. Krathard, it's suicide. Kalarn pulsed back, his usual calm replaced by urgency. The decay field is too strong. Your shields won't hold. They don't need to hold, Thorn said, a grim finality in his voice. He looked at the Genesis device schematic glowing on his secondary screen. Not the full device. Too slow, too risky in the middle of a fleet action, but the core principle, the space-time unraveling trigger, they'd miniaturized it. A single warhead, a one-shot weapon. The cost would be his ship, his life. Just make sure they remember why, Thorn said, cutting the comm. The Resolute II surged forward, a lone spear of light and steel diving into the heart of darkness. Concord and human ships, understanding the sacrifice being made, threw themselves into the breach, laying down a withering crossfire of kinetic and energy weapons, creating a temporary corridor through the Devourer swarm. The Resolute II's shields flared crimson, then failed, hull plating vaporized. Alarms screamed. Thorn ignored them. His eyes were fixed on the swirling vortex of the heart. He armed the Genesis warhead. Not for the fleet, not for the Concord, for Earth, for Renner, for every soul lost to the darkness. He input the final sequence. The warhead's core began to resonate, a low hum that vibrated through the dying ship, a song of unraveling reality. The heart of the Devourer sensed the threat. A beam of pure entropy thick as a planet lanced out, engulfing the Resolute II. On the bridge of the Concord flagship, Kalarn watched the sensors. He saw the human ship vanish into the decay beam. He saw the Genesis signature flare, not with destructive energy but with a terrifying absence. Then the heart of the Devourer stuttered. The swirling vortex flickered. The decay beam faltered. The Genesis warhead hadn't destroyed the heart. It had unraveled the connection between the Scourge intelligence and the Void Weaver essence. The two ancient horrors, bound together, were suddenly violently separated. The Scourge fragment, deprived of the Weaver's entropic power, collapsed in on itself, a dying AI shrieking into the void. The Void Weaver fragment, suddenly exposed and vulnerable without the Scourge's technological shell, recoiled from the concentrated life energy of the combined fleet. It couldn't feed. It couldn't corrupt. It was just entropy. And entropy, faced with overwhelming organized resistance, retreated. The remaining Scourge-kin vessels, their central intelligence gone, their Weaver symbiosis broken, became mindless husks. They drifted, inert, or self-destructed in chaotic bursts of uncontrolled energy. Silence fell over the shattered veil. The Devourer swarm was broken. The immediate threat was over. Kalarn stared at the sensor display where the Resolute 2 had been. Only the faint, fading echo of the Genesis resonance remained. No debris, no life signs. Commander Aris Thorn was gone. On Aethel Prime, in the Hall of Concord Heroes, a new inscription appeared beneath the names of the Resolute's crew and Archon Brak. Simple, stark, human. Aris Thorn, Earth, East. Years later, a young human diplomat, her eyes holding the same fierce resilience as those who came before, stood on the balcony of the Concord Embassy, overlooking the now thriving gardens of Aethel Prime. Below, Veln children played alongside human children, their laughter mingling in the clean air. Concord and human ships patrolled the skies together, a seamless blend of elegance and strength. She touched the simple bronze plaque on the balcony railing, the one bearing Thorn's name. She remembered the stories, the death world, the quarantine, the fleet that showed up, the sacrifices made. A Velin elder, Ischiden, now etched with the lines of age and hard-won wisdom, approached her. It was Caliphan's successor. "They say your people are still intense, Ambassador," he pulsed, his voice gentle, still prone to dramatic solutions. The young ambassador smiled, a flash of white teeth against her sun-browned skin. She looked out at the united fleet, then back at the vibrant living garden below, a garden that now included thorns and weeds and the deep, unyielding roots of earth. "We learned from the best, Archon," she said, her voice carrying the quiet strength of a species that had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. "Sometimes, the only way to protect a garden is to be willing to burn it all down to save a single seed." She turned and walked back inside, towards the Grand Conclave chamber, where the 13th sigil glowed as brightly as any other. The universe was still vast, still dangerous. But humanity was no longer hiding in the dark. They were part of the light, and they would never ever be pruned again. The cost had been paid. In full.